Planck is the father of quantum mechanics. He was the first one that calculated quantum mechanics. Yeah, right.
The modern official sciences, especially all natural sciences, respect in their researches the principle of methodic naturalism. That is, they consider all phenomena, all processes, as entirely natural, and therefore in their scientific explanations, they do never adduce or cite supernatural entities and forces. The purpose of this paper is to show that modern science has its own self-existent, self-acting, self-sufficient, etc. Natural all-being, natural omni-being, that is the entire nature considered as a whole that justify the scientific methodic naturalism. Since this natural all-in being contains the entire realm of existence and of all manifestations of existence like information, activity, laws, and so on, it should be called the universal integer absolute. The term absolute, derived from Latin, solutus ab, unbounded, means here that the natural all-in being is entirely self-dependent. It does not depend upon anything and anyone. It is entirely independent, self-existent, self-acting, autodynamic, source of all information, laws, and so on. Since the natural all-in being contains in itself the entire set of all actual and possible cosmoses, it should be called also cosmic. Therefore, I use the denomination universal cosmic absolute. On the turn of the 20th century, the science has begun to look for a theory of everything, or a final theory, or a master theory, unifying not only all interactions, but also the whole realm of reality. In my opinion, the universal cosmic absolute will constitute in such a theory a radical, all-penetrating basic reality, and will substitute step by step the traditional supernatural personal absolute. The term absolute, denoting all being and omni-being, containing the entire reality that is actual and potential, was introduced in our Western culture by the mathematician, astronomer, philosopher, and Catholic theologian Nicholas of Cusa, often simply called Cusanus. He was to a certain extent a modern scientist, because in his researches he often adduced mathematical and geometrical notions and metaphors, and also astronomical observations, and used imaginative mental experiments. Thanks to this kind of methods, he arrived to the conclusions that, thanks to which he is considered as a very significant precursor, as a great forerunner of Nicholas Copernicus and Johannes Kepler. 100 years before Copernicus, he announced that Earth and other planets revolve around the Sun on orbits which are not circles but ellipses. Therefore, Kepler considered him as divinely inspired. Cusanus maintained also that in the universe there are many extrasolar planetary systems composed of planets on which can be found life, consciousness, and intelligence sometimes higher than ours. According to him, stars and planets are not idle spheres. They are to a certain extent flattened because of their rotational motion. According to him, the all-embracing absolute is the ontological center of the world machine. In my opinion, his conception of the absolute is in its essence, when we do some improvements compatible with the modern science, especially with the modern scientific cosmology, and with the new tries to formulate a theory of everything in its large sense. Janus absolute is panontic. In the ancient Greek, panontos means the all-being, the all-in-being, the omni-being that embraces the entire realm of existence and of all manifestations of existence in this information, activity, laws, and so on. Introducing the term and notion of the universal cosmic absolute, I inspired myself in Cusanus' panontic conception, and I tried to innovate, to improve it in order to make it compatible with modern science. As mathematicians, Cusanus considered the absolute as the greatest possible maximumness, as the maximal extraordinary grandeur. We can say that according to him, the absolute is the greatest possible quantitative and qualitative maximum listening. He said often that a greater being is not thinkable. He called the all-in-being, using Latin, maximum simpliciter, simply maximum. It is obvious that Cusanus, as a priest and cardinal of the Catholic Church, identified his absolute with God. But his God was not the traditional God. The traditional theist, though the Church took over from Cusanus the term absolute, reduced the absolute to an infinitely perfect supernatural spirit and person. Cusanus' absolute is free from such a reductionism. The traditional God is far from the Cusanus absolute, which is panontic. It embraces the entire domain of the quantitative and qualitative ontological richness of the whole being. The Nicholas of Cusa conception, in my opinion, is free from all kinds of reductionism. His maximum simpliciter is the omni-being, simply saying the all, the omnity, the allness of the Cusanus absolute belongs to its fundamental attributes. Therefore, he was accused of pantheism. However, his advocates defended him, indicating that in the Bible, in the Sirach book, called also Ecclesiasticus, we find the following statement: we could say more, but could never say enough. Let the final word be, he himself is the all. In Greek, pan estinautos. In the theistic conception, we are dealing with a fundamental dualism, God creator and nature created out of nothing. Cusanus' conception is not dualistic, it is dialectic. The basic principle that governs in it sounds coincidence of opposites. Cusanus defines the absolute in Latin as complicatio oppositorum et eorum coincidentia, that is, as a convolution of opposites and their coincidence. In other words, as an immense complexity of opposites and their complementary coexistence, like, for instance, maximum, minimum, one and only and multiple, original and derivative, cosmos order and chaos disorder, simplicity and complexity, indivisibility and divisibility, indestructibility and destructibility, non-local, local, and so on. With coincidence of opposites, we are dealing in everyday life and in scientific researches. The most fundamental dialectic opposite, it is the constitutive opposite components of the maximum simpliciter, simple maximum, maximum absolutum, the absolute maximum, and maximum contractum, the contracted maximum. This basic coincidence of opposites constitutes the source of all other opposites that coincided in the simple maximum, that is in the all in being that constitutes the universal integral cosmic absolute. The absolute maximum represents all what is original, generating, basic, fundamental, primordial, causal, creative, essential, necessary, all what constitutes a basic, active information, and so on. Instead, the contracted maximum represents all what is potential, virtual, secondary, derivative, accidental, all what constitutes a compacted information, able to be put in reality, all what manifests itself through a second-hand activity and creativity. The absolute maximum is self-existent and self-acting. It exists and acts by its nature. The contracted maximum exists and acts through participation. Therefore, the local beings and activities are local manifestations of the non-local absolute maximum. Also, therefore, in the simple maximum, it is in the all being, we are dealing with the conservation law of existence, or better, with the conservation law of being. According to this law, after the expansion of the contracted maximum, resulting with an enormous complexity and innumerable singular beings, there will be neither more or less being, but only more beings, non plus entis et plura entia. And in case of disappearance of complexity and beings, there will be again neither more or less being, but only fewer beings, non minus entis et minora entia. In other words, in the universal cosmic absolute, we are dealing only with structural, functional, informational, and nomological transformation of that what constantly is, that incessantly exists. All kinds of conservation laws are manifestations of the fundamental of being conservation. I see that I have no time, and I should give an example of coincidence of opposites in physics. Mega quantum of action and you see lambda mega quantum. I shall explain in the text. The principle of extreme action as an example of the coincidence of opposites taken from modern physics. In the universal cosmic absolute, we are dealing with many examples of maxima and minima. I am going to show that the universal constants and cosmic parameters lead us not only to micro quanta of action, but also to mega quanta of action. As well known, the physical quantity called action has been introduced into physics by Maupertuis. He also formulated the least action principle. when the calculus of variations has been used in the examination of the mentioned principle, it has been disclosed that action is submitted to a larger variational principle because it is not only a minimum, but in certain cases it can be also a maximum. Therefore, it is now more correct to call it principle of extremum or extremal action. It is often called also the principle of stationary action. The principle of extremal action is central in the classical physics and remains central in modern physics, being applied in the theory of relativity, especially in general, in quantum mechanics and quantum field theory. In general relativity applied to the cosmos, that is with Einstein's cosmological constants lambda, the Lagrangian of action has the following form. You can read the components of this Lagrangian. At the end of the 19th century, Max Planck introduced his famous constant, called by him the elementary quantum of action. It became the fundamental quantum of quantum mechanics. There are also other quanta of action connected with the four fundamental interactions. For instance, the quantum connected with the electromagnetic interactions, where E is the elementary electrical charge. This quantum of action was seriously considered by Albert Einstein, Max Planck, and Schrödinger, and Eddington. Planck's quantum of action is related to his well-known units of length, time, and mass determined by C, G, and H. The quantum of action connected with electromagnetic interaction is related to Stoney's units of length, time, and mass determined by C, G, and E, where E is the elementary electrical charge. Stoney, who is famous for his introduction of the term electron to describe the elementary unit of electricity, and for calculation of his value from Faraday's law, introduced his units in 1881. Planck and Stoney's quantum of action are micro-quantities. They are minimal portions of action, 10 to minus 34, 10 to minus 37. Let's look for opposite maximal quanta of action. One of them is related to the lambda units. The lambda mega quantum of action is related to lambda units. They determine it. Let's first introduce the lambda units. Since the exact numerical value of constant lambda is not yet known, we shall use the approximative value. So we see the lambda length, lambda time, lambda mass, lambda energy. Now we can introduce the lambda mega quantum of action determined by lambda units. As we can see, this quantum of action is a mega quantum because it's 10 to 86. Since the Einstein's gravitational constant is equal, as we can see, we can the Formula 1 write in a more aesthetical way. as we can see, lambda mega quantum of action is the inverse of the product of the three fundamental constants of general relativity. C, the velocity of light, K, the Einstein's constant of gravitation, and lambda, the cosmological constant. Note that the formula concerning lambda mass and energy can be written in an analogical way. We are dealing with the three constants. Now let's add lambda units, let's add other lambda units that we will use in this paper. Let's begin with the so-called pressure of the physical vacuum, or lambda density of energy. We have here lambda pressure, lambda acceleration, and lambda force. Lambda force is 1 divided by K. Let's return to the Lagrangian. Note that in this Lagrangian, the lambda force 1 divided by K is present and placed at the first place. It is divided here by 2. In the Lagrangian there are also present the three constants on which h lambda depends. This fact indicates that in the Lagrangian the constant h lambda can be disclosed. You have here the Lagrangian written with this constant. In such a way, we can see how the action in general relativity with lambda depends in a natural way on the lambda mega quantum of action. This aspect is here explicitly shown. We can conclude that in general relativity with lambda applied to the universe as a whole, the action is quantized. Is this fact connected with the existence of finite causally bounded zones because of the finite speed of transmission of interactions? For us observers on our Earth, our Hubble sphere constitutes our causally bounded zone. Every Hubble sphere constitutes such a causally bounded zone. There are Hubble spheres partially superposed and other totally separated. The lambda mega quantum of action concerns every Hubble sphere. Since the approximative numerical value of lambda time is close to the approximative numerical value of Hubble time, because in reality they are identical, and therefore the product of lambda energy that causes the Hubble expansion and lambda time gives the lambda mega quantum of action. In quantum mechanics, we use the notion of Planck's charge. If we introduce in a similar way the notion of lambda charge, then the Lagrangian can be written as follows, or in such a way. In such a way, another aspect of the physical process called action, it is the dependence on the charge, is disclosed and put at the first place in the Lagrangian. The Polish physicist Czesław Białobrzezki maintained that action is the physical dynamical process in which dynamical quantities are connected with space-time quantities. momentum multiplied by length, energy multiplied by time, angular momentum multiplied by angle of translation, force multiplied by length and time, work multiplied by time, and so on. Therefore, I tried to indicate some of this connection in the Lagrangian, no changing its quantitative value. That's still the Lagrangian in which the lambda pressure is disclosed and put at the first place. Let's add here a conclusive interpretation. In a Hubble sphere, because of the lambda force that causes the lambda pressure, the sphere expands with lambda acceleration, and the dark energy performs a work equal to the lambda energy during the lambda time. The resulting momentum along the lambda radius equal to lambda length gives the lambda action. Since action consists in the transport of energy and momentum during a certain time and along a certain path, therefore the product of lambda energy and lambda time and the product of lambda momentum and lambda length give the lambda action that is performed during the lambda time and along the lambda radius. In Hubble sphere we are dealing not only with dark energy that causes the expansion, but also with gravitational energy that causes the gravitational attraction. Therefore we have to look also for a mega gravitational unit which concerns, so we have to look also for the mega gravitational units which concern the Hubble sphere as a zone that is bounded causally by gravitation. Titlers indicated units for every concrete mass. If we introduce in Gitter's equations the gravitational mass of dark matter plus ordinary matter, gravitationally gravitationally bounded and embedded in Hubble sphere, then we can introduce a gravitational mega quantum of action. The mega lambda action is greater than gravitational quantum of action. The gravitational force is given by this equation. Note that the relation between the dark energy and gravitational energy, it shows that energy, dark energy is 70% and gravitational energy 30% in our universe. Perhaps general relativity is able to be quantized in the mega scale, and we have to construct a mega scale quantum mechanics for it. If our universe is flat, it is infinite. In an infinite universe, as a reference frame, each Hubble sphere is a very small causally bounded part. The scattering of matter in every Hubble sphere is different. It is characterized by randomness. Therefore, also the following of time that depends on the presence of matter in every Hubble sphere is different. The product of uncertainty of energy embedded in a Hubble sphere and of the uncertainty of Hubble time is probably equal or greater than h lambda in certain cases, and in other cases than hg. Perhaps we have to introduce Heisenberg-like uncertainty principle of megascale. All these considerations are only hypothetical ideas that must be further investigated. However, we must be aware that in all systems of units determined by universal constants and cosmological parameters, called often also constants, there is a quantum of action determined by these constants and parameters. Such quanta of action have their physical meaning that must be disclosed. H, lambda and hg belong to them. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ludwik. That was a very interesting presentation. Does anyone have questions for Ludwik?
Yeah, this is has some feeling of correctness to it, but I just want to try to translate that into things that at least I personally am more familiar with. But are you saying that this large quantum of action is basically the action in the universe as we know it, meaning the bubble sphere?
It's a quantum of action of every Hubble sphere, because only inside Hubble sphere it works in every Hubble sphere, because in the infinite universe the Hubble spheres are infinite. The number of Hubble spheres.
Well, I mean, if I consider the universe as an event, and an event measured is measured, the material of an event is measured by action, then what you're saying, I think, is that we have a small quantum and we have a large quantum. And the large quantum represents the action of the universe as we know it.
Yes.
So the sphere.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, because
Makes sense.
that's a hypothesis.
You may be interested in the presentation I'll be giving on Wednesday, because I will be deriving for the first time in the history of modern science Planck's constant, and show it's an interior property of elementary particles. And so that whether quantum theory cannot explain the origin of Planck's constant, and they cannot predict it. They have to take it as an adjustable constant that you measure experimentally. And the work that I'm doing is the first to ever predict the value of it. And it follows in the work of Bohm and others like Vigier in terms of the interpretation of quantum mechanics.
Other questions? Or you need to comment on this? Anybody else?
Thank you for
We're up to our first coffee break. Before you go today, make sure this is the